Take a breath and settle in. Welcome to Metaphysics at the Movies, the podcast where film meets deeper meaning and every scene becomes a doorway to insight. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing someone who doesn't just watch movies, he reads them. Reverend Rich P. is a Unity minister, speaker, and teacher of practical spirituality, known for blending real-life wisdom with metaphysical truth in a way that's grounded, accessible, and powerful. Around here, it's not just about what's happening on the screen. It's about what's happening within us as we watch. So whether it's drama, comedy, or action, Reverend Rich P. helps us uncover the spiritual principles, the hidden patterns, and the deeper messages woven into the stories we love. Get ready to see movies differently, and maybe even see yourself differently too. Let's get into it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Metaphysics at the Movies. I'm Rev Rich P, and I'm glad you're here. I've been waiting to do this movie because I think it may be one of the most metaphysical movies we've covered, The Truman Show. Now, if you've never seen it, the basic idea sounds almost ridiculous. And as always, there are spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen the movie and want to see it before you hear this, stop the podcast now, go watch the movie. I think I watched mine on Pluto TV, which is a free streaming service. Just rewatching it. Otherwise, you can catch it on any streaming service. Otherwise, stick around. So now, Truman Burbank is living in what believes is a perfectly normal life. He has a job, a wife, a best friend, a nice house. He lives in this beautiful little town called Sea Haven. Every morning he gets up, walks outside, and says, "Good morning. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night." And everything looks normal, except none of it is real. His town is a television set. The people around him are actors. His marriage is a part of the show. His best friend is a part of the show. Thousands of cameras are watching him. Millions of people around the world have watched his entire life since the day he was born. And Truman has absolutely no idea. Now, here's where this movie started messing with me because obviously we're not living inside a giant television studio. At least I hope we're not. And if somebody's watching me make coffee in the morning, I apologize. It's not compelling television. But I started thinking about Truman's life. He didn't choose the world he was living in. He was born into it. He was taught what was normal. He was taught what was safe. He was taught what was dangerous. He was given a definition of success. He was given a role. And most of his life, he never questioned it. And I thought, wait a minute, that part sounds familiar. Because most of what you believe about yourself you didn't actually choose. Think about it. How much of what you believe about money, relationships, success, God, your body, your worth, what you're capable of, what it's supposed to do with your life, how much of it did you consciously choose? And how much of it was handed to you by well-meaning parents, teachers, religious leaders, culture, television, friends, people who loved you, people who hurt you, people who were simply repeating what had been handing down to them. And one day, if fortunate, something happens. Something doesn't quite fit anymore. And we begin to ask, wait, is this actually true? And that's where the Truman journey begins. And I think that's where spiritual awakening begins too. So Truman didn't wake up one morning and suddenly understand everything. That's not how it happened. Little things started to go wrong. A light falls out of the sky. That's probably a clue. He hears a radio frequency describing his movements. People start appearing in the same patterns. An elevator opens and he briefly sees what looks like a backstage equipment. Little cracks start appearing in the world that he thought he understood. And at first he tries to explain them away because that's what we do. We are like film. We like familiar. We like things to be the same way all the time. There's a story I share constantly about an old man on a rocking chair with his dog laying next to him, whimpering. And every day this guy drives by, sees the same scenario. Finally has the courage to stop, see the guy, and say, "Hey, why is the dog crying?" He goes, "He's laying on the nail." And he goes, "Why is he laying on the nail if it hurts?" He goes, "Well, when it hurts bad enough, he'll get up." And that's most of our lives. We sit and we like that familiar even when it hurts, because it's the same thing we do over and over. And so even when familiar isn't working, there's a strange comfort in knowing what to expect. I guess the general saying would be, it's better the devil we know than the devil we don't know. I've seen people stay in jobs they hated because the paycheck was familiar, stay in relationships that have ended emotionally years earlier because being alone felt unfamiliar, stay in churches where they no longer felt spiritually fed because that's where they'd always gone, keep beliefs that made them miserable because questioning those beliefs felt dangerous. I've done versions of that myself. Sometimes we know something isn't right long before we're willing to admit it. You feel it, a little something inside. You can't always explain what it is. You just know. And sometimes we have to say something has to change. And usually our first response isn't wonderful, a spiritual awakening. No, usually it's, how do I make everything go back to normal? Because normal is comfortable, isn't it? Even dysfunctional normal can be comfortable. At least we know how it works, but sometimes spirit starts distributing or disturbing, our normal. And maybe that disturbance isn't punishment, but maybe it's an invitation. Maybe something in you is saying you've outgrown this. So what changes Truman isn't that Sea Valley becomes fake. It was fake the whole time. What changes is Truman starts noticing. That's huge. The truth didn't suddenly appear. His awareness changed. And it's funny that this movie works alongside two talks I just did at Unity of Fredericksburg, and you can look them up in YouTube if you want to watch those talks. But we talk about where before transformation, awareness must happen. And that's metaphysics. We talk so much about it in Unity about consciousness, and sometimes consciousness sounds like this big mystical idea, but consciousness can be very simple. It's basically what you're aware of. Two people can experience the same event and see completely different things because they are bringing different consciousness to it. Truman has walked those streets thousands of times. Suddenly, he begins to seeing patterns that he never noticed before. Have you ever had that happen in your own life? You learn something about yourself and suddenly you see it everywhere. Maybe you realize you're a people pleaser, and then you start noticing how many times a day you say yes when you really meant no. That's an uncomfortable week. Maybe you realize you have a fear around money. Suddenly you hear the things you say every time a bill arrives. Maybe you begin working on forgiveness and realize how many old conversations you're still having with people who aren't even in the room. Nothing outside necessarily changed. You changed. And that change caused you to change what you're willing to see. And then once you see something, you can't completely unsee it. And that's why awakening can be uncomfortable, because awareness creates responsibility. Before I know, I can say, I didn't know. After I know, now I have a choice. That's where the work begins. So there's a question I've learned to appreciate. Whenever I catch myself saying I can't do that, I try to ask, who told me that? Not always. Sometimes I can't do something. I can't dunk a basketball. Positive thinking isn't going to fix everything, but there are other limitations that deserve investigation. I'm too old. Well, who told you that? I'm not smart enough. Well, who told you that? People like me don't do things like that. Who told you that? I never make enough money doing something I love. Who told you that? I'm not spiritual enough. Who told you that? I'm just that kind of person. Okay, but is that true? Or is that a line that you've been repeating so long that it sounds like truth? Truman had been conditioned from childhood to fear the water. And this part of the movie is brilliant. They know Truman might eventually want to leave Sea Haven, so they created a fear strong enough to keep him there. As a child, Truman watches his father suddenly drown during a storm. And from that point on, he's terrified of open water. And Sea Haven is surrounded by water. Think about that. They didn't need to lock Truman in a prison. They just needed to convince him that leaving is dangerous. That might be the biggest spiritual lesson in the whole movie. The strongest prison doesn't always need walls, just needs something you fear. And I remember a story that was told to me a while ago about that, where prisoners were brought down to, I guess, what you would call the executioner or the jailer or the punisher, or whatever you want to title it. And they would be given a choice. They would either choose death or to go through the door. And three times out of three, the jailer and his assistant would pose the question, and they always chose death. So finally, the assistant turns to the jailer and says, "Hey, what is beyond the door that is so frightening to these people that they would choose death?" And he goes, "Nothing but freedom." And it was because we were so afraid of what was behind that door, because it was the unknown to these people, they'd rather be put to death. So, how many dreams have died because of something that you never actually happened? Not failure, the fear of failure, not rejection, the fear of rejection, not embarrassment, the possibility of embarrassment. We create entire futures in our mind that respond emotionally as though they've already happened. I'm going to look foolish. They're going to say no. What if it doesn't work? What if I lose money? What will people think? They are all real feelings that we have, but feelings aren't always instructions. Fear can tell us something needs attention. Fear can protect us from genuine danger, but fear can also be old programming. Truman's fear of the water made sense based on what he believed had happened, but the fear was being used to control him. And here's where I want to be careful. Spirituality shouldn't teach us to ignore fear. It is something that is genuinely unsafe. Pay attention. Wisdom does matter, but we can ask, is this fear protecting me from danger or for protecting me from change? And that's a very different question, because some things I'm calling safety is really familiarity, excuse me, and those aren't the same things. So where we feel like we're being safe is just that familiar comfort that we're used to, even if it hurts. And regretfully, safety and that comfort in pain or that comfort in the uncomfortable are not the same thing. So let's talk about we have Christoph. Christoph created the show. He essentially has been controlling Truman's world from the beginning. And what's fascinating is that Christoph genuinely believes he's protecting Truman. That's what makes him interesting. He doesn't see himself as a villain. He believes the outside world is dangerous, and he believes that Sea Haven is better because it can be controlled, because it's predictable, because it's safe. And toward the end of the movie, he tells Truman that there's no more truth in the outside world than there is in the world he created for him. And maybe there's something worth hearing there, because leaving the familiar doesn't guarantee an easy life. Awakening doesn't mean everything becomes perfect. Sometimes we get this idea that spiritual growth should remove difficulty. I don't think it works that way. You can wake up spiritually and still have bills. You can meditate every morning and still have people who get on your last nerve. You can know you're a divine expression of God and still have days when you don't feel particularly divine. Truman isn't choosing between a fake difficult world, and a real perfect world. He's choosing between a controlled life and an authentic life, or as in the talks that I had just done, an intentional life. And that is different. The real world may hurt him, people may disappoint him, things may not work out, but at least the choices will be his to make. And that's freedom. And freedoms come with risk. Something else happens when Truman begins waking up. Everybody around him tries to convince him he's wrong. His wife, his friend, the people in the town, everybody reinforces the old story. And that happens in real life too. Sometimes when we change, the people around us get uncomfortable. Not necessarily because they're bad people. The old version of you fit in their world. Maybe you were always the one who said yes, then learned boundaries. Uh-oh. Maybe you were the one everybody called whenever they needed something. Then you started taking care of yourself too. Now you're different. Maybe you stopped participating in family drama. Maybe you changed careers. Maybe your theology changed. Maybe you started asking questions nobody in your circle wanted to ask. People may try to put you back in the old role. That's not like you. Maybe it is like me. Maybe you're just meeting a part of me I haven't given permission to live yet. That's part of growth. You have to be willing to disappoint the expectations that were built around an older version of you. I want you to hear that again. You have to be willing to disappoint the expectations that were built around an older version of you. And that's hard, especially if you're a people pleaser, because we want everybody to understand. We want, and that's something sometimes they won't understand. Sometimes you have to move away. I've been in that situation many a times where I thought I was ministering, I'm doing the right thing, but in reality, I was people pleasing. Maybe even more, I was doing it because I was afraid the person wouldn't like me. But once I woke up to that awareness and made changes, people started to leave my life because they weren't meant to be there anymore, because they had their own understanding and they'd rather I live in their world than to live as the best me in our world. So now let's look at the character Sylvia. She's one of the few people who actually tries to tell Truman the truth. She's supposed to be an extra in the world, but she sees him as a person, not a character, not a product, a person. She tries to tell him, everybody knows about you, everybody around you is fake. And before she can explain everything, she's removed. But Truman never forgets her. And I love that part of the movie because sometimes one person telling you the truth can change your entire life. They may not be able to walk the entire journey with you, but they may only plant a seed, but you remember. Maybe you had someone like that. Maybe it was a teacher, a minister, a friend, a counselor, a book. Someone said one thing at exactly the right moment, and something inside you went, wait a minute. Maybe life doesn't have to be this way. Maybe I'm not who I thought I was. Maybe there's another possibility. And that's why our worlds matter. You never know which sentence someone may carry for 20 years, all because you took the time to say something. Now, eventually, Truman decides he's leaving. And how does he leave? By getting in a boat. The very thing he has been conditioned to fear. That's the moment. Not because he's no longer afraid, because freedom finally matters more than fear. He gets on the water, Christoph creates a storm, and Truman keeps going. The waves get worse. He keeps going. At one point, it looks like he may die, but he keeps going. And finally, the boat hits something, the sky. Literally, he reaches the edge of the world, or actually the edge of his world. He touches what he thought was the horizon and discovers it's a wall. That scene gets me every time because imagine discovering that the limits you thought were reality were constructed. And I wonder how many walls in our lives are like that. We reach something and say, this is as far as I can go. Maybe, or maybe it's just where your current belief ends. That's where the difference lies. Truman gets out of the boat, he finds stairs, and then there's a door. I love that there's a door because the whole movie comes down to this. He has discovered the truth, but knowing the truth doesn't automatically make him free. He still has to walk through the door. That's practical spirituality right there. You can read every book, take every class, listen to every podcast, go to every workshop. You can know the five principles, you can quote scripture, you can understand metaphysics. Wonderful, but eventually there's a door, and you have to decide whether you're going to walk through it. Knowledge doesn't change your life until it becomes action. And that's what brings us to the power of will. Boy, does this talk come so much close to the talks I've done over the last 2 weeks. For this movie, we keep coming back to the power of will. Will is the ability to choose, to decide, to commit, and then make a move. Truman spends most of the movie becoming aware, but awareness alone didn't get him out. Eventually, he makes a decision. I'm leaving. That's will. Will isn't forcing life, it's directing your energy toward a conscious choice. And I think one of the most powerful things we can realize is that you may not have chosen what happened to you. You may not have chosen the beliefs you were handed. You may not have chosen the environment that shaped you. But today, you have some choices. Maybe not every choice. Maybe your circumstances have real limitations, but somewhere is the next available choice. And that's where your power is. Not yesterday, not what somebody else should have done. Here and now. What do I choose from here? So this week's practice of who told me that is to catch one limiting statement you regularly make about yourself. Just one. Maybe it's I can't. Maybe it's I'm not. Maybe I'm never. You can finish those sentences. Or people like me don't finish that sentence. I want you to write it down. Then I want you underneath write who told me that. And I don't want you to rush through this because I want you to pinpoint where that belief came from. Was it your actual belief, or did you inherit it from someone? Or did some painful experience become a rule for the rest of your life? Then ask, is this still true? And finally, what would I choose if I didn't have to obey this belief anymore? You don't have to change your whole life this week. Just find one door and maybe put your hand on the handle. That's as far I need you to go. When awareness, and I said this in my talks, awareness always precedes transformation. When you're aware, you've given yourself your key. When you make the choice and find that door, then you've taken that first step, and the action is to put your hands on the handle. You don't have to walk through the door yet until you're ready, but start to become aware. So at the end of the movie, Truman stands at that door. Christoph speaks to him from above. He tries one last time to convince Truman to stay. He tells Truman he knows him better than Truman knows himself, and Truman listens. He then turns around, he looks back at the world that he has been his entire life, and instead of giving some huge dramatic speech, he gives them the same line he's been saying all along. In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And he bows. And I love that because then he walks through the door. We don't get to see what happens next. And I think that's perfect because that's faith. Sometimes you don't know what's on the other side of that door, just like the story I told you. You just know you can't stay where you're at. Maybe that's where somebody listening today is. Something in your life doesn't fit anymore. Maybe it's a belief, maybe it's a role, maybe it's a habit, maybe it's a relationship with yourself. And you started noticing the cracks. Don't panic. Just pay attention, become aware. You don't have to figure out everything. Truman didn't. You don't have to know exactly what happens next. You just have to become honest about what you know now. And maybe the question is, how do I fix my whole life? Maybe it is, what's the next door? And when you find it, will you walk through it? So take this moment with me and let's affirm together. I am willing to question beliefs that no longer serve me. I listen to the wisdom of spirit within. I release the fear that was never mine to carry. I honor the person I have been, and I give myself permission to grow. Divine will gives me the courage to choose consciously. I do not need to see the entire path. I trust the next step. I am free to become more fully who I came here to be. And so it is. So I want to thank you for spending this time with me at Metaphysics at the Movies, excuse me. And I really do hope the next time you watch The Truman Show, you see more than a brilliant Jim Carrey movie. Look at your own Sea Haven. Look at the beliefs you've accepted because everyone around you accepted them. Look at the fears that may have kept you safely inside familiar boundaries, and then look for the door, because waking up is powerful, but eventually you've got to do something with what you discover. If this episode made you think of somebody who's standing at their own door right now, share it with them, and make sure you're following Metaphysics at the Movies, because next week we continue our summer blockbuster that teaches spiritual truth series with a movie you might not expect. We're going into the world of the Matrix, and we're going to ask what happens when you finally discover that the reality you've accepted your whole life may not be the whole truth. And we're talking about awakening, choice, identity, belief, and the most famous question: do you take the blue pill and return to what's familiar, or the red pill and discover how deep the rabbit hole goes? So that's it till next time. The Matrix is what's coming up. What if I'm making up changes every time? Or what if I'm waking up changes everything? That's the way to go. The Matrix. What if waking up changes everything? Anyway, until that question, what needs questioning? Listen to that still small voice. Find the next door. And when it's yours to walk through it. So as always, take that truth and walk with it. Peace and blessings, my friend. And so it is.
And just like that, the credits start to roll. But here's the truth. What you saw in the movie is already playing out in your life. So the question is, what are you choosing to believe? What role are you stepping into? And what truth are you ready to live? That's the work. If this episode spoke to you, don't just sit with it. Walk with it. Apply it. Live it. Let it move through you. And if you're ready to go deeper, more teachings, tools, journals, and ways to activate this in your everyday life, head over to revrichp.com. That's where the conversation continues. Until next time, keep watching, keep awakening, and take that truth and walk with it. Peace and blessing.